Hello everyone and welcome back to AniMonolith's Tensei Slime Light Novel Summary Series. Picking up from the previous events, after the unification requires the remaining powers to form a temporary alliance, the story moves to Atlantis, the smallest continent of the Azalea Union, located on the eastern edge of their territory. Despite its size, Atlantis was rich in natural resources, especially iron ore and oil. These resources allowed Azalea to build its largest and most heavily fortified military base there. Unfortunately, this also marked the beginning of its downfall. Near the base stood an ancient ruin, and within it lay an underworld gate, a portal to another world. Long ago, the native tribes performed a ritual meant to communicate with the gods. Instead, the ceremony caused a fracture in space-time. The Phantom race later discovered that crack and eventually stabilized it into a functional gate. After that, they began possessing the local Azalean population, taking over the military facilities and using them as a foothold for a full-scale invasion. Standing before the gate was a man in a reddish-brown military uniform, commanding a mixed group of possessed soldiers. His slicked-back black hair and sharp, narrow eyes hidden behind glasses made him look intelligent and dangerous. He was the second in command of Cornu's legion, originally a cherub of the heavenly realm before mutating into a phantom. Though nameless by nature, he now called himself Amari Masahiko, the name of the man whose body he had taken. The three leaders of the Phantom race were capable of giving names to their followers, but Cornu never cared about emotional ties or loyalty. As a result, none of his subordinates had names of their own. Whenever they possessed a human body, they simply adopted the human's name. Their power increased dramatically as well. Masahiko's body, trained through the battle will martial arts, was an exceptionally good vessel. After more than 100 days of possession, the phantom within had completely assimilated and was now able to unleash its full strength, a terrifying 10 million EP. EP were also used to determine who could pass through underworld gates. A gate with 500,000 EP, for example, could be crossed only by beings with EP lower than that value. Stronger beings had to send in diminished, split bodies, while their main bodies remained behind, gradually restoring their true power through a spiritual corridor. This was the typical method the Phantom race used when invading other worlds. However, if the split body died, the power invested in it vanished permanently. The three demon generals, Cornu and his equals, were exceptions. Their true bodies were too powerful to pass through ordinary gates. They needed gates with EP in the millions. The gate in Atlantis currently possessed only around 100,000 EP, meaning Cornu could not fully manifest yet. But the gate continued to expand rapidly, and once it reached the required threshold, Cornu would finally descend into this world. Most of Cornu's forces had already crossed over and were nearly done preparing for the invasion. Only Cornu's arrival was still pending. Their lineup included two top-tier officers, Masahiko and Pulcinella, each around 10 million EP, and four generals in the 600,000 EP range, such as David, Li Qianlong, and two still unknown. Compared to the human world, where the strongest warrior barely reached 100,000 EP, these phantoms were overwhelmingly superior. They could crush humanity at any moment. However, just as Velgrynd had explained earlier, using too much power at once risked destroying their human vessels. Because of this, high-ranking phantoms were reluctant to fight directly and allowed their subordinates to handle most tasks. They had also already chosen a suitable vessel for Cornu, Xinhua, the Chinese heroine considered one of the strongest humans alive. At previous video, Emperor Akira had mentioned both Xinhua and Pulcinella as two of the world's most powerful warriors. Unfortunately, Pulcinella had already been possessed by high-level phantom, and Xinhua was now marked as the next target. Logically, everything was going well. Under Cornu's command, two chief strategists and four generals had already manifested. The Underworld Gate was expanding even faster than predicted. Their invasion plan, orchestrated carefully by Pulcinella and the other generals, was nearly complete. Once Cornu manifested, nothing would stop them. However, Masahiko was still worried. Because none of them had anticipated Velgrynd's existence, trying to shake off his anxiety, Masahiko issued his final command, urging the army to complete the preparations before their true conquest began. After returning to the Empire following the high-level strategy meeting, Velgrynd headed straight to the Imperial Library. Several names mentioned during the discussion had bothered her, and she wanted to confirm whether her suspicions were correct. The first name was the Holy Archaea Empire. It resembled the kingdom of Archaea she had once guided long ago, back when she helped a small valley tribe rise from the Stone Age into a flourishing kingdom. She had even left behind 12 mythic-grade sacred artifacts to protect them before she departed. Finding the same lineage in this world suggested a strong connection she needed to verify. The next troubling name was George Hayes, the President of the United States of Azalea. His name matched the boy Velgrynd had interacted with 25 years earlier during a previous visit. According to her memory, George's father, Laurent Hayes, had carried a fragment of Rudra's soul. She had watched over Laurent from his youth until his death and knew the family well. But Veldanava's cosmology had no true parallel worlds, only worlds with similar names and events. Because of that, Velgrynd had to confirm everything carefully instead of jumping to conclusions. After reviewing historical records, she finally understood. She had traveled to this same world 3 separate times. Long ago in ancient times, then 25 years ago, and now. 25 years earlier, Laurent had still been alive, which meant 2 fragments of Rudra's soul existed simultaneously in this world. The phenomenon was extremely rare. Since a soul fragment only triggers a reaction when its host is near death, Velgrynd had had no way of detecting the second fragment at the time. Her failure to notice it was perfectly reasonable. With these discoveries, the political landscape suddenly felt less hopeless. But as Velgrynd was still processing the past, a new disturbance appeared. The Empress of the Empire, barging in with hostility. To Velgrynd, the woman was simply causing unnecessary trouble. The Empress, now around 50 to 60 years old, had long lost the youthful beauty expected of the wife of an emperor. Velgrynd casually remarked that Rudra's partner should naturally be beautiful. Before anyone could react, she lightly tapped the Empress's cheek, and the Empress's aged skin instantly rejuvenated in front of the stunned witnesses. Velgrynd then explained she would teach the Empress a breathing technique that maintained the body's vitality. It was not true immortality or age reversal, only a method to refresh the cells and keep the body healthier. But in truth, by manipulating the Empress's life spirit directly, she had more than doubled her lifespan, cured most illnesses, and strengthened her overall vitality. The Empress immediately pledged loyalty to Velgrynd. Her attendants followed soon after, all begging to learn the breathing technique. In just 2 days, Velgrynd's presence and overwhelming charisma allowed her to win over the entire imperial household. Once that matter was settled, she visited the Foreign Affairs Department to assess the progress of international alliances. Unfortunately, the situation was dismal. Some nations refused outright. China agreed only on the condition that the other major nations joined first. None of the large powers were willing to move, and with time running out, diplomacy was collapsing. Velgrynd decided she would intervene. Time was too short, and she was not the type to sit back while everything stalled. But the foreign minister reacted with anger. He feared Velgrynd's behavior would undermine diplomatic relations and cause greater instability. His frustration clashed with Velgrynd's fiery personality, leaving her increasingly irritated at the incompetence and stubbornness around her. Despite the tense situation, Velgrynd calmly took charge of international communications. Her first targets were the United States of Azalea and the Holy Arcia Empire, 2 nations whose cooperation the empire needed. Velgrynd handled the devices effortlessly, and with her usual decisiveness, she forced the lines open and initiated negotiations herself. Her connection to Azalea went surprisingly smoothly. In the past, Velgrynd had left a strong and unforgettable mark on Rudra's family, and this legacy extended to George, who had since become president. Because of this history, the moment her name Velgrynd was mentioned, George immediately recognized who she was and treated her with absolute seriousness. The officials around him were shocked, since they had assumed Velgrynd was merely an alias, but George's reaction confirmed she was the genuine being from their legends. Once George and Velgrynd re-established contact, he agreed without hesitation to pursue cooperation, leaving only the scheduling of formal meetings to be arranged. Negotiations with the Holy Arcia Empire were more complicated at first. Velgrynd contacted Pride, the leader of the 7 sacred vessels, Arcia's most elite combat unit. These 7 warriors wield divine artifacts that Velgrynd herself had once bestowed in ancient times. Because Pride and his subordinates were proud, highly disciplined, and accustomed to dealing only with national-level threats, he initially doubted Velgrynd's identity and questioned whether this woman calling herself a goddess could be real. But Velgrynd immediately dismantled his doubts by pointing out a detail almost no one alive should know. She had originally left 12 mythical-grade artifacts, not 7. When she demanded to know why only 7 were in use, Pride was shaken. This was a tightly guarded secret passed down only through oral tradition. In truth, over the Empire's 4,000-year history, 1 artifact's owner had betrayed the nation, 2 had disappeared without returning, 7 remained active, One artifact was in the hands of a hidden operative, and one still rested without a suitable master. Hearing Velgrynd mention these facts so casually not only proved her identity to Pride, it overwhelmed him. More than her words, it was her presence, her voice, the sheer force behind her statements that convinced him he was speaking to the true goddess of their empire's founding era. His earlier anger instantly faded, and he formally acknowledged her authority. From there, the negotiations moved quickly. Pride vowed to report her demands directly to the Emperor and ensure that the Empire cooperated fully with Velgrynd's plan. With that promise, Archaea effectively agreed to the alliance as well. With that, the two countries have basically accepted cooperation. And that's all the developments in today's video. Thank you for listening, goodbye, and see you again.